Most people wake up and immediately start scrolling, checking what they missed, diving into problems before their feet even hit the floor. But what if the first few minutes of your day could change everything that follows? What if gratitude wasn't just a nice idea but a powerful practice that shifts your entire perspective, opens doors you didn't know existed, and connects you to a grace that's been waiting for you to notice it? Here's the truth nobody talks about. You don't need more time, more money, or better circumstances to transform your life. You need to start seeing what's already there. Every morning, grace shows up new, offering fresh mercy, second chances, and blessings you've stopped counting because they've become too familiar. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending problems don't exist. It's about choosing to thank God before you ask for anything, recognizing that you're already surrounded by more than you realize. When you begin your day with gratitude, something shifts. Anxiety loosens its grip. Hope feels possible again. Love starts flowing instead of forcing. And the divine presence you've been seeking, it's been here all along, waiting for you to pause, breathe, and say thank you. So before the chaos starts, before the demands pile up, let's take this moment together to acknowledge the grace that's carrying you, the love that won't let you go, and the God who meets you new every single morning. There's something profoundly liberating about waking up and realizing that yesterday's mistakes don't have to follow you into today. Every morning brings with it a fresh slate, a new opportunity to start again, and that's not something you earn. It's pure grace. Think about it. How many times have you replayed a conversation in your mind, wishing you'd said something different, or carried the weight of a decision that didn't turn out as planned? The beauty of divine forgiveness is that it doesn't wait for you to become perfect before it shows up. It meets you right where you are, in the mess, in the confusion and whispers. You're still loved. Many people spend years trying to forgive themselves for things God has already forgiven. They build mental prisons out of guilt, replaying the same scenes over and over, as if punishment could somehow undo what's been done. But grace doesn't work that way. It's not about earning your way back into good standing. It's about accepting that love has already covered every failure. When you truly understand this, something shifts inside. You stop trying to be good enough and start living from a place of gratitude, knowing that thank you is the only response that makes sense when someone loves you despite knowing everything about you. The interesting thing about forgiveness is that it creates space for growth in ways that shame never could. When you're constantly beating yourself up, you're stuck in the past, reliving what went wrong instead of learning from it. But when you receive grace, you're free to look at your mistakes with honest eyes, extract the lessons, and move forward with wisdom. That's why every new day feels like a gift, not because you've finally earned it, but because grace keeps showing up, inviting you to try again. And in that invitation, you begin to see that transformation isn't about perfection. It's about being willing to keep showing up, knowing that love won't abandon you along the way. One of the most exhausting battles a person can fight is the war against their own reflection. Every day, countless people wake up and immediately start negotiating with themselves, wishing they were taller, smarter, funnier, or somehow different from who they actually are. But here's what changes everything. Grace doesn't love the version of you that you're trying to become. It loves you exactly as you are right now, with all your quirks, insecurities, and imperfections. This isn't about lowering standards or giving up on growth. It's about understanding that your worth isn't something you achieve. It's something you already possess. When you grasp this, thank you becomes more than words. It becomes a breath of relief. The pressure to be someone else is relentless in a world that constantly measures and compares. Social media shows you everyone's highlight reel while you're living your behind-the-scenes footage, and it's easy to feel like you're falling short. But grace cuts through all that noise with a simple truth. You were made intentionally, not accidentally. Every part of who you are, your personality, your struggles, even your story, has purpose woven into it. Think about how liberating it would be to stop apologizing for being yourself, to walk into a room without rehearsing what you'll say or how you'll act. That's what acceptance offers. The freedom to exist without performance, knowing that love isn't conditional on you getting everything right. What's fascinating is how acceptance actually unlocks the very growth that striving never could. When you're constantly rejecting yourself, you're operating from a deficit, always trying to fill a hole that judgment keeps digging deeper. But when you accept grace's acceptance, something shifts. You start changing not because you hate who you are, but because you're grateful for who you're becoming. It's the difference between a child learning to walk because they're excited about exploration versus one who's terrified of falling. Every new step forward feels different when it's rooted in love rather than fear. And as you move into understanding how this applies to starting over, you'll see why acceptance is the foundation for everything else. There's a quiet power in understanding that failure isn't final. Every sunrise carries with it an unspoken promise. Today doesn't have to look like yesterday. People often trap themselves in narratives they've outgrown, convinced that because something didn't work out once, it never will. But grace operates on a different timeline. It doesn't hold your past against your future. Consider the person who tried to start a business and watched it crumble, or someone who walked away from a relationship they thought would last forever. The temptation is to close that chapter permanently, to say, never again. Yet grace whispers something different. Try again, but this time with everything you've learned. That's not naivety. That's wisdom wrapped in hope. What makes new beginnings so transformative is that they don't require you to erase your history. They invite you to build on it. Think about it like this. A sculptor doesn't throw away the clay when the first form doesn't turn out right. They reshape it, using the same material to create something new. Your mistakes, your detours, even your heartbreaks, they're not wasted experiences. They're the raw material grace uses to craft resilience, discernment, and depth. When you wake up each morning and choose to thank God for another chance, you're not ignoring what went wrong. You're acknowledging that every misstep taught you something valuable. And that perspective shift changes everything about how you approach the day ahead. The beautiful thing about fresh starts is that they're available every single day, not just on January 1st or after some dramatic life event. You don't have to wait for perfect conditions or until you feel completely ready. Grace meets you in the mundane Monday mornings, in the middle of ordinary weeks, and says, "Let's go again." It's not about grand gestures or sweeping changes. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing a different response to an old trigger, or trying one more time after you've already tried 100. Each attempt isn't evidence that you're stuck. It's proof that you haven't given up. And as you begin to see how this persistence connects to the provision you need along the way, you'll understand why giving up was never really an option. There's a peculiar anxiety that creeps in when you look at your bank account, your pantry, or your calendar and start calculating whether you'll have enough. It's the kind of worry that keeps people awake at 3 in the morning, running mental math on bills, opportunities, and time. But here's what countless people have discovered when they look back on their lives. Somehow, some way, what they needed showed up. Not always when they wanted it, but always before it was too late. That's not luck or coincidence. That's grace working behind the scenes, orchestrating provisions you didn't even know to ask for. When you take a moment to thank God for the way things have worked out, You start noticing a pattern of faithfulness that logic alone can't explain. The interesting thing about provision is that it rarely looks the way you expect it to. You pray for a specific job, and instead, a conversation with a stranger opens a door you didn't know existed. You worry about finances, and then an unexpected refund appears, or someone offers to help in a way that perfectly covers the gap. It's like the story of a friend who was down to his last $20, stressed about how he'd feed his family for the week, when his neighbor knocked on the door with groceries she'd accidentally bought too much of. These aren't fairy tales. They're the daily reality of people who've learned to trust that every need has a timetable, even when it doesn't match their own. Grace doesn't just provide. It provides with precision, teaching patience and faith along the way. What shifts everything is realizing that provision isn't just about money or material things. It's about energy, ideas, connections, and even the breath in your lungs. You woke up today with a functioning body that you didn't consciously operate through the night. Your heart beat without permission, your lungs filled with air automatically, and your mind processed dreams without you directing the show. That's provision happening at a level so fundamental that people take it for granted until something disrupts it. When you expand your definition of what's been provided, gratitude becomes less about occasional big wins and more about recognizing the constant flow of love sustaining you. And as you begin to understand how this provision also protects you from what could go wrong, you'll see that grace is always working, even in the dangers you never saw coming. How many accidents didn't happen today? How many near misses did you avoid without even realizing danger was close? Most people go through life completely unaware of the invisible shield that surrounds them, only noticing protection when something dramatic occurs. A car swerving at the last second, an illness that could have been worse, a situation that almost spiraled out of control but somehow didn't. But grace doesn't only show up in the emergencies you recognize. It's working constantly in the background, redirecting paths, closing doors that would have led to harm, and opening routes you didn't know were safer. When you start each day with a prayer of gratitude, you're acknowledging a truth that's easy to forget. You're more protected than you realize, and that protection is a gift you can't manufacture on your own. Think about the times you almost made a terrible decision but something stopped you. A gut feeling, a delay, a friend's random advice that shifted your perspective. Or consider the mornings you left home 5 minutes later than planned, irritated by the delay, only to learn later that an accident happened exactly where you would have been. These aren't coincidences stacking up. They're evidence of a love that sees what you can't and intervenes in ways you'll never fully comprehend. There's a peace that comes from understanding you don't have to be hypervigilant about every possible threat because grace is already standing guard. That doesn't mean you throw caution to the wind. It means you can breathe easier, knowing that even your blind spots are covered by someone who sees everything. The most profound protection, though, isn't just physical. It's emotional and spiritual. Grace shields you from bitterness that could have consumed you after betrayal, from despair that could have paralyzed you after loss, from cynicism that could have hardened your heart after disappointment. Every day you wake up still capable of love, still willing to trust, still able to hope. That's protection in action. Life throws enough at people to justify becoming bitter, closed off, or fearful, yet somehow you're still here, still soft in the ways that matter, still open to new possibilities. That resilience isn't just your strength. It's grace refusing to let the world steal your capacity for joy. And as you continue to recognize these layers of care, you'll begin to see how this same grace weaves through every relationship in your life, transforming how you connect with others. The people who stick around when you're at your worst, those are the ones grace sends into your life. Relationships aren't accidents. They're carefully orchestrated connections that shape who you become, challenge who you are, and remind you that you weren't meant to navigate this world alone. Think about the friend who answers your call at 2 in the morning, the family member who forgives you even when you don't deserve it, or the stranger who offered kindness exactly when you needed it most. These moments aren't random. They're grace made visible through human faces. When you take time each morning to thank God for the people in your life, you're recognizing that love doesn't just exist in theory. It shows up wearing familiar faces and speaking with voices you've learned to trust. What's fascinating is how grace uses relationships to mirror back lessons you couldn't learn any other way. The person who frustrates you most might be teaching you patience. The one who challenges your opinions could be expanding your perspective. Even the relationships that ended, the friendships that faded, the partnerships that dissolved, they weren't failures. They were chapters that served their purpose and made space for new growth. There's a woman who once told her story about a friendship that fell apart after 20 years, and for months she mourned it as a loss. But looking back, she realized that relationship had become toxic, and its ending created room for healthier connections that better reflected who she was becoming. That's grace operating with surgical precision, removing what no longer serves you while positioning you for what's next. The real gift in relationships isn't finding perfect people. It's discovering that imperfect people can love you perfectly anyway. Everyone you care about will disappoint you at some point, just as you'll disappoint them, and that's not a bug in the system. It's the entire point. Grace flows through the cracks of human imperfection, teaching forgiveness, humility, and the art of loving people as they are rather than as you wish they'd be. Every morning when you choose gratitude for your relationships, you're also choosing to see them through a lens of grace rather than judgment, connection rather than criticism. And as you begin to notice how this same grace creates unexpected opportunities in your daily life, you'll understand that every encounter, whether it lasts 5 minutes or 50 years, has the potential to change everything. Opportunities don't always knock loudly. Sometimes they whisper in the form of a casual conversation, an unexpected email, or a door that opens when you weren't even looking for one. People often miss the best chances of their lives because they're waiting for something that looks more impressive, more obvious, or more aligned with their original plan. But grace has a way of disguising opportunities as ordinary moments that turn out to be anything but ordinary. That job you almost didn't apply for, the event you attended reluctantly, the person you started talking to out of politeness. Any of these could be the turning point you'll look back on years from now and say, "Thank God I didn't miss that." When you start your day acknowledging that every encounter holds potential, you train yourself to recognize grace working in real time rather than only in hindsight. What makes opportunities so powerful is that they're not just about career advancement or financial gain. They're about alignment with purpose. Consider the teacher who influenced a student's entire trajectory with one conversation, or the entrepreneur who met their future business partner in a coffee shop line. These connections didn't happen because someone was networking aggressively. They happened because grace orchestrates intersections between people who need each other at exactly the right moment. There's a story about a man who missed his flight and, frustrated, sat at the airport gate where he struck up a conversation with another stranded passenger. That conversation led to a partnership that changed both their lives. What felt like bad luck was actually grace rerouting him towards something better. Every delay, every detour, every missed opportunity, they're often protection from something lesser, making space for something greater. The tricky part is learning to trust the timing even when it doesn't make logical sense. You apply for 100 positions and hear nothing. Then suddenly one yes appears that outweighs all the rejections. You pitch your ideas repeatedly to deaf ears until the right person finally hears and says, "This is exactly what we've been looking for." Grace doesn't operate on your schedule, and that's actually the point. If you were in control of the timing, you'd likely choose things before you're ready for them or before they're ready for you. Each morning when you express gratitude for opportunities, you're also surrendering the need to force outcomes, trusting that what's meant for you won't miss you. And as you continue walking in this trust, you'll discover that growth itself becomes less about striving and more about receiving what grace has been preparing you for all along. Growth isn't always comfortable, and that's precisely why most people resist it. There's something terrifying about outgrowing old versions of yourself, leaving behind beliefs that no longer fit, or stepping into spaces where you're a beginner again. But here's what changes everything. Growth isn't something you force. It's something grace orchestrates through circumstances you didn't choose and challenges you didn't request. Think about the moments that changed you most. A failure that humbled you, a loss that deepened you, a conflict that taught you boundaries. None of those felt like gifts at the time, yet looking back, they're the very experiences that shaped your character and expanded your capacity. When you thank God each morning for growth, you're not just celebrating the progress. You're acknowledging that even the painful stretching was necessary for who you're becoming. The fascinating thing about transformation is that it often happens in the mundane repetition of daily choices rather than dramatic overnight changes. You don't wake up suddenly patient, wise, or resilient. You become those things through 1,000 small decisions to respond differently than you used to. It's like learning a new language. At first, every sentence requires conscious effort and translation, but eventually, you start thinking in that language without trying. A man once shared how he spent years battling anger, trying to white-knuckle his way into calmness through sheer willpower. It never worked until he started each day asking for grace to see situations differently. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his default responses shifted, not because he was trying harder, but because grace was rewiring his instincts from the inside out. That's growth that lasts because it's rooted in something deeper than personal determination. What makes this process beautiful is that grace doesn't compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. You're not in competition with anyone's timeline, and your growth doesn't need to look impressive to outsiders to be significant. Every small victory matters. Choosing honesty when lying would be easier, extending forgiveness when bitterness feels justified, showing up when quitting seems reasonable. These aren't minor accomplishments. They're evidence that you're being transformed in ways that matter far more than surface-level success. Each morning when you acknowledge how far you've come, you're also giving yourself permission to be patient with how far you still have to go. And as you lean into this journey, you'll notice something shifting internally, a quietness that doesn't depend on external circumstances, a peace that becomes your new foundation. Peace isn't the absence of problems, it's the presence of calm in the middle of them. You've probably noticed that some people can face absolute chaos and still maintain an inner stillness that defies logic, while others fall apart over minor inconveniences. The difference isn't personality type or stress management techniques. It's grace creating a foundation that external circumstances can't shake. Think about the last time you should have been panicking but somehow felt an unexplainable calm, or when everything around you was falling apart yet you found yourself able to breathe through it. That wasn't you being strong. That was grace holding you steady when you had every reason to crumble. When you start your morning thanking God for peace, you're acknowledging that tranquility isn't something you generate. It's something you receive, often when you need it most and expect it least. What's remarkable is how peace operates on a frequency that anxiety can't touch. Worry lives in the future, replaying worst-case scenarios that haven't happened and probably never will. Regret lives in the past, rehashing decisions you can't change and mistakes you've already learned from. But peace exists only in the present moment, in the here and now where grace meets you with exactly what you need. There's a story about a woman who spent years battling insomnia, her mind racing through endless what-ifs every night. She tried medication, meditation apps, every sleep hack imaginable. What finally changed wasn't a technique. It was a shift in her morning practice. She started each day thanking God for peace before she even needed it, essentially preloading her spirit with trust instead of fear. Slowly, her nights became quieter, not because her circumstances improved, but because her foundation did. That's grace rewiring your nervous system from the inside out. The beautiful paradox of peace is that it doesn't eliminate challenges. It transforms how you move through them. You still face difficulties, but they don't define your internal state anymore. Bills still need to be paid. Relationships still require work. Uncertainties still exist. But none of those things steal your ability to rest in the middle of it all. It's like standing in the eye of a hurricane, where everything around you swirls with intensity, yet where you stand remains untouched. Every morning when you choose gratitude for this peace, you're also choosing not to let chaos have the final word over your day. And as you cultivate this inner stillness, you'll begin to notice something else emerging. A lightness, a capacity for joy that doesn't wait for perfect conditions to show up. Joy isn't something you manufacture. It's something that finds you when you stop chasing it. There's a difference between happiness, which depends on circumstances, and joy, which exists despite them. Happiness says, I feel good because things are going well. Joy says, things are hard, but I'm still grateful to be alive. Most people spend their lives waiting for conditions to be perfect before they allow themselves to feel joy. But grace flips that script entirely. It offers joy as a baseline, not a reward for good behavior or favorable outcomes. Think about the moments when you've laughed until your stomach hurt, when something simple brought unexpected delight, or when gratitude just bubbled up for no logical reason. That wasn't circumstantial. That was grace reminding you that life itself is a gift worth celebrating, even when it's messy. What makes joy so powerful is that it's contagious in ways that complaining never is. When you walk into a room carrying genuine joy, people feel it before you say a word. It shifts the atmosphere, lightens heavy conversations, and gives others permission to exhale. There's a story about a man who worked in a factory doing repetitive, exhausting labor. Every morning, he'd show up singing, cracking jokes, finding reasons to thank God for small things. A good cup of coffee, a co-worker's birthday, even the fact that his body could still do the work. His colleagues thought he was strange at first, but over time, something shifted. The whole floor became lighter. People started smiling more, helping each other, looking for reasons to be grateful. One person's joy became a catalyst for an entire environment to transform. That's grace multiplying itself through one willing heart. The trap most people fall into is believing joy will arrive once they achieve something. The promotion, the relationship, the financial milestone. But grace offers joy now, not later, because waiting robs you of the present moment. You don't need everything figured out to experience joy. You just need to notice what's already good. The sun that rises without your permission, the people who love you despite knowing your flaws, the fact that you get another day to try, to learn, to become. Every morning when you thank God for joy, you're choosing to see life through a lens of abundance rather than scarcity. And as you continue embracing this perspective, you'll find that hope stops being something fragile and becomes something unshakable, anchoring you no matter what storms come. Hope is what keeps you moving forward when logic says you should quit. It's not blind optimism or naive positivity. It's a stubborn belief that the story isn't over yet, that there's still another chapter waiting to be written. People who've lost hope don't just stop dreaming. They stop trying, stop connecting, stop believing that change is possible. But grace plants hope like a seed in the darkest soil, and somehow, impossibly, it grows even when conditions suggest it shouldn't. Think about the times you had every reason to give up but didn't, when something inside whispered, "Keep going," even though you couldn't see the path forward. That wasn't willpower alone. That was grace sustaining hope when your own strength ran out. Every morning when you thank God for hope, you're acknowledging that your ability to believe in better days isn't self-generated. It's divinely maintained. What's fascinating about hope is that it doesn't require evidence to exist. It creates evidence by inspiring action. When you hope, you try again. When you try again, you learn. When you learn, you grow. And when you grow, you become capable of things that seemed impossible before. There's a powerful example in the story of a woman who lost everything in a house fire. Belongings, photos, memories accumulated over decades. Standing in the ashes, she had every right to collapse into despair. Instead, she said something profound. "I'm grateful we're alive, and I'm choosing to believe this isn't an ending. It's a clearing for something new." That wasn't denial. That was hope refusing to let tragedy have the final word. Within a year, she'd rebuilt not just a house but a completely new life that she later described as better than before. Not because the fire was good, but because hope transformed how she responded to it. The beautiful thing about hope is that it's contagious, spreading from person to person like light passing between candles. When you carry hope into a conversation, you give others permission to hope too. When you demonstrate that setbacks aren't permanent, you inspire someone else to try again. Grace uses your hope as a tool to reach people who've forgotten what it feels like to believe in possibilities. Every new morning is itself an act of hope. The sun rises again, your heart beats again, another chance arrives again. You don't have to know how things will work out to trust that they will. You just have to stay open to the idea that grace is working even when you can't see it yet. And as you anchor yourself in this hope, you'll discover something deeper emerging, a sense of purpose that transforms how you see your entire life's direction. There's a restlessness that lives inside people who haven't discovered their purpose yet, a nagging sense that life should mean more than just existing from one day to the next. You've probably felt it, that pull towards something greater, the suspicion that your life is supposed to contribute to something beyond yourself. But here's what grace reveals. Purpose isn't something you invent, it's something you uncover. It's been there all along, woven into your story, your struggles, your gifts, and even your scars. When you thank God each morning for purpose, you're not asking for a cosmic revelation to drop from the sky. You're acknowledging that every experience you've lived has been preparing you for something specific. The question isn't whether you have purpose, it's whether you're paying attention to the clues grace keeps leaving along your path. What makes purpose so powerful is that it transforms mundane tasks into meaningful contributions. The same action, whether it's showing up to work, raising children, or having a difficult conversation, feels completely different when you understand it's part of a larger story. There's a man who spent years feeling frustrated in a job he considered beneath his potential, constantly dreaming of doing something more significant. Then one day, a coworker pulled him aside and said, "You have no idea how much your encouragement has kept me going through the hardest season of my life." In that moment, everything shifted. His purpose wasn't elsewhere. It was right where he'd been standing, in the small daily interactions he'd dismissed as insignificant. Grace has a way of revealing that your purpose isn't always about grand stages or impressive titles. Sometimes it's about being faithful in the ordinary moments that matter more than you realize. The beautiful mystery of purpose is that it evolves as you do. What you were called to 5 years ago might look different from what you're called to now, and that's not failure, that's growth. Grace doesn't lock you into one narrow definition of purpose for your entire life. It expands and refines it as you mature. Every season brings new opportunities to contribute, new ways to serve, new people to impact. When you start each day with gratitude for purpose, you're also releasing the pressure to have it all figured out. You're trusting that as long as you show up with an open heart, grace will continue revealing the next right step. And as you walk in this clarity, you'll notice something transforming inside you. A deep healing that touches places you didn't even know were wounded. Healing doesn't always look like you expect it to. Sometimes it's loud and dramatic, but more often it's quiet and gradual, happening in layers you don't notice until you look back and realize you're not the same person you used to be. People carry wounds that don't show up on X-rays, betrayals that shattered trust, losses that carved holes in their hearts, words spoken years ago that still echo in moments of doubt. But grace meets you in those broken places with a kind of love that doesn't rush the process or demand you get over it on someone else's timeline. When you thank God each morning for healing, you're acknowledging that restoration is already in motion, even when you still feel the pain. Every day you wake up a little less bitter, a little more willing to trust again, a little softer toward yourself. That's grace working beneath the surface, mending what you thought was permanently shattered. What's remarkable about healing is that it often happens through the very things that hurt you. The relationship that ended teaches you what you truly need in a partner. The job loss redirects you toward work that actually fits your gifts. The illness that scared you reminds you what matters most and what you've been wasting time on. There's a powerful story about a woman who spent years angry at her father for abandoning the family when she was young. That wound colored every relationship she had, making it impossible to trust men or believe love could last. But through a painful process of forgiveness, not excusing what he did, but releasing the grip it had on her life, something shifted. She described it like setting down a heavy backpack she'd been carrying for decades. The healing didn't erase the past, but it freed her future. That's what grace does. It doesn't rewrite history, but it rewrites what that history means for your tomorrow. The beautiful truth about healing is that it's not just for you. It's for everyone your life will touch moving forward. When you allow grace to heal your wounds instead of letting them fester into bitterness, you break cycles that could have been passed down for generations. You become someone who can hold space for others' pain without needing to fix it immediately, who can love without keeping score, who can extend grace because you've received so much of it yourself. Every morning when you express gratitude for the healing happening inside you, you're also participating in it, choosing to cooperate with the process rather than resist it. And as this transformation continues, you'll discover something emerging that you can't learn from books alone. A kind of wisdom that only comes from walking through fire and coming out refined rather than destroyed. Wisdom isn't the same as intelligence. You can be brilliant and still make terrible decisions. Intelligence knows facts. Wisdom knows what to do with them. It's the difference between understanding that fire is hot and knowing not to touch it anyway. Grace offers wisdom that doesn't come from books or degrees, though those have their place. It comes from lived experience, from mistakes that taught you what not to do, from quiet moments when something just clicked and you suddenly understood what had been confusing you for years. When you thank God each morning for wisdom, you're acknowledging that your best decisions weren't just products of your own cleverness, They were guided by something beyond yourself, a knowing that showed up exactly when you needed it most. Every time you chose the harder right over the easier wrong, every time you listened to that quiet voice instead of the loud crowd, that was grace whispering direction. What makes wisdom so valuable is that it sees what others miss. The long-term consequences of short-term choices, the patterns repeating themselves, the red flags everyone else ignores. There's a story about a young entrepreneur who was offered a lucrative partnership that would have catapulted his business overnight. On paper, it looked perfect. But something felt off, and despite pressure from advisors telling him he'd be crazy to pass it up, he declined. 6 months later, that company was exposed for fraud, and everyone associated with it faced legal consequences. He couldn't explain how he knew. He just knew. That's wisdom operating beyond logic, a gift that protects you from paths that look right but lead wrong. Grace doesn't always explain why. It just guides you away from dangers you won't understand until much later, if ever. The beautiful thing about wisdom is that it grows most in the soil of humility. The moment you think you've got everything figured out is usually right before you learn a hard lesson. But when you approach each day with gratitude for wisdom, you're also staying teachable, recognizing that there's always more to learn and new ways to grow. Wisdom doesn't make you rigid in your thinking. It makes you flexible, able to adapt when circumstances change, willing to reconsider beliefs that no longer serve you. Every morning when you ask for wisdom, you're essentially saying, I don't know everything, and I'm okay with that. And as you cultivate this posture of openness, you'll notice something beautiful happening around you. People start showing up in ways that enrich your life. Connections form that make everything better, a sense of belonging that reminds you that you were never meant to walk this journey alone. Nobody makes it through life alone, no matter how independent they think they are. You can be self-sufficient in many ways, but there are moments when you need someone to show up, to listen without judging, to carry part of the weight when yours becomes too heavy. That's what community offers, not just casual acquaintances or social media followers, but real people who see you, know you, and choose to stay anyway. Grace orchestrates these connections with stunning precision, bringing people into your life exactly when you need them, sometimes before you even realize you do. When you thank God each morning for community, you're recognizing that the right people surrounding you isn't random luck, it's divine design. Every person who's walked alongside you through hard seasons, celebrated your wins without jealousy, or told you hard truths you needed to hear, their grace wearing human faces. What's powerful about genuine community is that it creates a mirror where you see yourself more clearly. Your friends reflect back your growth, call out patterns you can't see on your own, and remind you who you are when you forget. There's a beautiful example in the story of a man who went through a devastating loss and completely withdrew from everyone, convinced he needed to process his grief alone. His community refused to let him disappear. They showed up with meals he didn't ask for, sat with him in silence when he had no words, and gently pulled him back into life when he was ready. Years later, he said, I thought I needed space, but what I actually needed was people who loved me enough not to give me what I asked for. That's grace working through community. Knowing what you need better than you do, and providing it even when you resist. The beautiful paradox of community is that it requires vulnerability, which feels risky, but that risk is what creates depth. Surface-level relationships are safe but unsatisfying. Real connection happens when you let people see the messy parts and they don't run away. Every time you choose authenticity over pretense, you give others permission to do the same, and suddenly everyone's breathing easier because nobody has to perform anymore. When you start each day grateful for the people in your life, you're also committing to show up for them the way they've shown up for you. And as these bonds deepen, you'll discover something you desperately need but can't create on your own. True rest that comes not from escaping life, but from knowing you're held by love even in the middle of it. Rest isn't laziness. It's resistance against a culture that measures your worth by your productivity. There's a lie most people believe, that you have to earn the right to rest by exhausting yourself first, that stopping means you're weak or uncommitted. But grace offers something radically different. Rest as a gift, not a reward. Your body was designed with limits, and honoring those limits isn't failure. It's wisdom. When you thank God each morning for rest, you're acknowledging that sleep, Sabbath, and stillness aren't indulgences. They're necessities that grace provides because love knows you can't run forever. Every night your body repairs itself without your conscious effort. Every breath happens automatically. Every heartbeat continues while you dream. That's rest happening at levels you'll never fully control, reminding you that you were never meant to sustain yourself through sheer willpower alone. What makes rest so countercultural is that it requires trust. Trust that the world won't fall apart if you step away, that your value isn't dependent on constant output, that pausing doesn't equal quitting. There's a compelling story about a farmer who worked his land relentlessly, convinced that more hours meant better harvests. He skipped rest days, pushed through exhaustion, and eventually his health collapsed. During his forced recovery, something unexpected happened. His fields, which he'd been unable to tend, actually produced better crops that season. The soil needed rest as much as he did. When he returned to work, he implemented regular rhythms of rest, and his land became more productive than when he was overworking it. That's grace teaching a principle that defies human logic. Sometimes doing less produces more because rest creates space for things to regenerate naturally. The beautiful truth about rest is that it's not just physical. It's mental, emotional, and spiritual. You can sleep 8 hours and still wake up exhausted if your mind never stops racing, if your emotions are constantly triggered, if your spirit is depleted from carrying burdens grace never asked you to bear. Real rest happens when you release control, when you stop trying to manage every outcome, when you trust that God's got the things you can't fix. Every morning when you express gratitude for rest, you're practicing surrender, acknowledging that you're human and that's okay. And as you cultivate this rhythm of work and rest, you'll notice something profound happening. You start learning things you couldn't access through hustle alone, insights that only come when you create space for them to emerge. Learning doesn't stop after graduation. In fact, that's often when the real education begins. Life has a way of teaching lessons that no classroom ever could, and grace ensures that every experience, whether pleasant or painful, carries something valuable if you're willing to extract it. The mistake most people make is thinking they've learned everything they need to know, closing themselves off to new perspectives or information that challenges what they believe. But when you thank God each morning for the ability to learn, you're acknowledging that growth requires staying curious, staying humble, and staying open to being wrong. Every conversation with someone who sees the world differently, every book that shifts your perspective, every failure that reveals a better way, these aren't interruptions to your life. They're the curriculum grace designed specifically for you. What's fascinating about learning is that it often comes disguised as difficulty. The easy paths teach you very little. It's the struggles that force you to develop new skills, think differently, and discover capabilities you didn't know you had. There's a powerful example in the story of a woman who took a job completely outside her expertise, terrified she'd fail. The first 6 months were brutal. She made mistakes, asked embarrassing questions, and felt incompetent daily. But instead of quitting, she approached it like a student rather than an expert. She asked for help, studied relentlessly, and admitted when she didn't understand. A year later, she'd not only mastered the role, but brought innovations no one else had thought of precisely because she hadn't been limited by how things have always been done. That's grace turning inadequacy into opportunity, using what you don't know as a doorway to what you can become. The beautiful thing about being a lifelong learner is that it keeps you young in the ways that matter most. People age fastest when they stop being curious, when they've decided they know enough and there's nothing new worth discovering. But when you approach each day with gratitude for what you can learn, every experience becomes interesting. The stranger in line at the grocery store has a story. The problem at work has a lesson. The conflict in your relationship reveals something about yourself you hadn't noticed. Every morning when you thank God for learning opportunities, you're essentially choosing to see life as an adventure rather than a routine. And as you embrace this mindset, you'll find that something remarkable begins to emerge from within you. Ideas, innovations, and creative solutions that surprise even you because grace is unlocking potential you didn't know existed. Creativity isn't reserved for artists, musicians, or writers. It's the ability to solve problems in new ways, to see possibilities where others see dead ends, to make something meaningful from whatever materials you have. Every person carries creative potential, but most people never tap into it because they've been convinced that creativity requires special talent or training. But grace offers creativity as a gift that shows up in unexpected moments. The parent who turns a difficult conversation into a teaching moment, the employee who finds a solution nobody else considered, the friend who knows exactly what to say when words seem impossible. When you thank God each morning for creativity, you're acknowledging that innovation isn't something you force. It's something that flows when you create space for it, when you stop trying so hard and let ideas come to you naturally. What makes creativity so powerful is that it transforms limitations into opportunities. When you have everything you need, there's no pressure to innovate. But when resources are scarce, time is limited, or options seem non-existent, that's when creativity explodes. There's an inspiring story about a teacher in an underfunded school who had no budget for supplies, but needed to engage students who'd given up on learning. Instead of lecturing, she turned lessons into games, used everyday objects as teaching tools, and invited students to create their own projects based on what interested them. Engagement skyrocketed, test scores improved, and students who'd been labeled unreachable suddenly thrived. That wasn't expensive curriculum or fancy technology. That was grace using creativity to unlock potential everyone else had written off. Sometimes the best solutions come not from having more, but from thinking differently about what you already have. The beautiful thing about creativity is that it's contagious. When you start thinking imaginatively, it inspires others to do the same. One person's willingness to try something new, to risk looking foolish, to experiment without guarantees gives everyone else permission to explore their own ideas. Every morning when you express gratitude for creativity, you're also inviting it to show up in areas you might not expect. In how you approach challenges at work, in how you communicate with people you love, in how you navigate problems that seem unsolvable. Grace doesn't just give you creativity for art projects. It infuses your entire life with the ability to adapt, innovate, and find beauty in unexpected places. And as you cultivate this creative mindset, you'll discover something essential emerging. A resilience that doesn't break when life gets hard, but instead bends, flexes, and finds new ways forward. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time you do. Life will knock you down. That's not a question of if, but when. The storms come, the losses happen, the plans fall apart, and in those moments, you discover what you're really made of. But here's what grace reveals. Resilience isn't something you manufacture through positive thinking or mental toughness alone. It's a gift that shows up in your darkest moments, giving you strength you didn't know you had, helping you take one more step when you thought you were done. When you thank God each morning for resilience, you're acknowledging that your ability to keep going isn't just personal grit. It's grace carrying you when your own strength runs out. Every time you've survived something you thought would destroy you, every time you rebuilt after everything fell apart, that was grace whispering, "Not yet. There's more for you here." What's remarkable about resilience is that it's built through adversity, not despite it. You don't develop strength by lifting light weights. You develop it by pushing against resistance that challenges your limits. There's a powerful story about a man who lost his business, his marriage, and his health all within the same year. Everyone expected him to crumble, and honestly, there were days he almost did. But instead of staying down, he did something unexpected. He started each morning thanking God for what he still had. His life, his children, the lessons he was learning, even the pain because it meant he was still feeling something. Slowly, impossibly, things began to shift. New opportunities emerged, relationships healed in ways he hadn't imagined, and his health improved through changes he'd needed to make for years, but never had the motivation until crisis forced it. That's grace using rock bottom as a foundation for rebuilding something better than what existed before. The beautiful truth about resilience is that it's not just about surviving, it's about who you become through the process. Every challenge you overcome adds another layer of depth, another tool in your toolkit, another reason you can look at future obstacles and think, "I've been through worse and I'm still here." When you start each day with gratitude for resilience, you're also reminding yourself of your own track record. You've survived 100% of your worst days so far. That's not luck. That's grace giving you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, training you for levels you couldn't handle before but are ready for now. And as this resilience deepens, you'll notice something beautiful happening. Life starts feeling less like a struggle to survive, and more like a series of moments worth celebrating, even the small ones that others might overlook. Celebration isn't frivolous, it's essential. There's a tendency to minimize victories, to downplay achievements, to rush past good moments because there's always another goal waiting, another mountain to climb. But grace invites you to pause and acknowledge what's worth celebrating, not because you've reached perfection, but because progress matters, moments matter, and joy matters. When you thank God each morning for reasons to celebrate, you're training yourself to notice the good that already exists instead of only focusing on what's missing. Every milestone reached, every lesson learned, every relationship that deepened, every day you chose to show up when quitting seemed easier, these aren't small things. They're evidence that you're moving forward, that grace is working, that your life is unfolding exactly as it should even when it doesn't look like you planned. What makes celebration so transformative is that it shifts your perspective from scarcity to abundance. When you celebrate, you're acknowledging that good things are happening, which trains your brain to look for more good things. There's a fascinating story about a family that started a tradition of sharing 3 wins at dinner every night. Anything from landing a new client to finding a parking spot or having a meaningful conversation. At first, it felt forced, especially during hard seasons when finding 3 positives seemed impossible. But over time, something shifted. They started noticing blessings they would have overlooked before, small graces woven into ordinary days. The practice didn't change their circumstances, but it changed how they experienced those circumstances. That's what celebration does. It doesn't deny reality, but it refuses to let difficulty be the only story you tell about your life. The beautiful thing about celebration is that it's contagious. When you genuinely celebrate others' wins without jealousy, you create an environment where everyone feels safe to succeed. When you honor your own progress without arrogance, you give others permission to acknowledge theirs. Every morning when you express gratitude for things worth celebrating, you're also cultivating a spirit of generosity that recognizes there's enough good to go around. Grace doesn't limit blessings to a select few. It pours them out abundantly, and the more you notice them, the more you see. And as you continue this practice of celebration, you'll discover something grace has been offering all along. Another chance, a fresh opportunity, the gift of beginning again no matter how many times you've stumbled before. So here's the question that matters. What are you going to do with everything you've just learned? You've walked through 20 dimensions of grace: forgiveness that frees you, acceptance that validates you, new beginnings that invite you, provision that sustains you, protection that shields you, and so much more. But knowledge without application is just information collecting dust. The real transformation happens when you take what resonates and actually live it. What if you started tomorrow morning differently? What if before you checked your phone, before you worried about your to-do list, you spent just 5 minutes thanking God for the grace surrounding you right now? What would shift in your heart? What anxiety would loosen? What hope would emerge? You have a choice every single day. You can focus on what's missing, or you can celebrate what's present. You can replay yesterday's failures, or you can embrace today's fresh start. You can operate from fear and scarcity, or you can live from faith and abundance. Which one are you choosing? Because here's the truth. Grace is already working in your life whether you acknowledge it or not. But when you start thanking God for it, you position yourself to receive even more. So I'm challenging you, try it. Every morning for the next week, before anything else, speak gratitude out loud. Thank the Lord for specific things: your breath, your people, your second chances, your purpose. Watch what happens. And if this prayer brought you peace, if it shifted something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. You could be the reason someone feels God's love when they were about to give up. Subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you can continue learning how to live in gratitude, grow in faith, and recognize grace in every season. God bless you, and may His peace be with you always.